Hyperinflation is here. The Fed pumped over $9 trillion into the US economy last year, and now we are in for a ride. This is what Reddit and other discussion forums are abuzz with right now. But these fears are real? Is hyperinflation inevitable? In this video, we are going to analyze whether this is true or not. The outbreak of the pandemic caused the financial markets to crash in March 2020, followed by choking off the supply chains as the world went into intermittent lockdowns, causing an economic recession that we are still suffering from. To save the economy from crashing, the US government decided to pump money into the market. According to economists, almost 20% of all US dollars in existence were created and circulated in 2020. This figure instantly rings alarm bells about the devaluation of the dollar. Is hyperinflation on the cards for the US? Well, in order to answer this question, we must first try and understand why the government had to print and circulate so much money. The financial crash of 2020. The financial market crash of March 2020 was the biggest market crash since the global financial crisis of 2008. As the markets began to slide due to the fear and uncertainty caused by the pandemic and the oil price war, the investors dumped their investments from stocks and bonds and preferred to hold their cash investment. So as stocks, bonds and commodities crashed, the value of the dollar strengthened, which was not a surprise because the same happened in 2008. When stocks crash, bonds rise, but when both stocks and bonds crash, investors turn to the most liquid asset, which is the dollar. Like 2008, in 2020 the investors had liquidated their investments, and this meant that investors had more cash at hand than the banks and credit institutions had to lend out. This is what you call a credit crunch. The world came very close to a credit crunch around the 21st of March last year. The situation became so dire that even companies like Apple could not find financing for their short-term operational requirements. Fed intervention. It was around this time that the Federal Reserve decided to intervene by directly injecting liquidity into the market. This was a rare instance of the Fed directly stepping into the market to lend funds to businesses to prevent them from collapsing. Other central banks followed the Fed, and this basically created a chain reaction across the world where central banks started to pump money into the markets to prevent a global financial meltdown. But what was the need to pump so much money? Remember that the financial system is based on trust. The currencies we have today are not backed by gold or silver. Instead, the fiat currencies are backed by the trust in the government. When markets crash, they indicate a reduction in the trust level and an increase in risk. Trust and risk are inversely proportional, so when lending institutions see that the market risk is rising, they stop trusting their borrowers and increase their lending requirements. In 2008, when the markets began to crash, the credit rating agencies started to downgrade the companies, which created a domino effect. In March 2020, we came very close to that same domino effect, but timely intervention by the Fed prevented that situation. Remember that risk and trust are always inversely linked with each other in financial markets. High risk and low trust lead to credit downgrading, which leads to a credit crunch. We learned in 2008 that quantitative easing can prevent a credit crunch, and in 2020 we saw the timely implementation of it. The Fed, fearing a chain reaction of corporations collapsing like dominoes, decided to step in by directly lending money to corporations. This restored confidence in the market because lenders and corporations both understood that borrowers were not going to default on payment. In the last year, over $9 trillion has been pumped into the market to support the economy. This is an astounding figure. But the question is, did the direct intervention of the Fed solve the existing problem of the market? The simple answer is no. Direct intervention by Fed and by other central banks across the world did not solve the problem, because the problem was and still is the uncertainty and fear caused by the pandemic. What Fed and central banks did was simply put the economy on a life support machine till the answer to the problem was found, in the form of vaccines. Now that the economies are opening up, where will the $9 trillion injected in the last year alone go? Reddit and other discussion forums are buzzing with speculations about the imminent collapse of the dollar and hyperinflation. This fear is not unfounded because anyone who has studied basic economics knows you cannot print as much money as you like. Technically you can. Japan, for instance, has proven that you can print as much money as you like.
Wait, does this mean we can print as much money as we need without any of the negative consequences?
Well, in order to understand this, we need to understand inflation first.
What is inflation?
Inflation is simply defined as a rise in the general price level. The general price level is an index that measures the change in the price of goods in an economy over time, and hence the purchasing power of the currency of the country. Since the 80s, at least, the inflation rate in the USA has been roughly under 6%. In recent years the rate has hovered around 2%. This was simple inflation.
Now, what is hyperinflation?
Well, hyperinflation is a rapid rise in the price level. Economists define hyperinflation as a rise in the price level by more than 50% per month. This comes to around a 10% daily rise in price levels. This means that the grocery you bought 1 week ago for $500 ends up costing $700 the next week, and then $900 the next, and in a month it crosses $1,000.
While simple inflation slowly erodes the purchasing power, hyperinflation on the other hand plunges the society into chaos and anarchy. When hyperinflation hits, you hear stories about people carrying wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. In any case, hyperinflation results in a total socio-economic collapse. Although it gets talked about a lot, hyperinflation is not that common. The USA, for instance, has never experienced hyperinflation. The closest it came to hyperinflation was during the Civil War and the Great Depression, when inflation rates peaked at 20%. Hungary, Yugoslavia, Zimbabwe, and in recent times Lebanon can be seen as worst-case scenarios for hyperinflation. According to Professor Steve Henk of Johns Hopkins University, the underlying causes of hyperinflation are always the same. Governments start running larger and larger fiscal deficits and call on the central bank to fund those deficits because tax and bond financing avenues are inadequate. In hyperinflations, central banks are required to virtually fund the government's entire fiscal operations. In addition to injecting a lot of money into the market, hyperinflation is almost always marked by socio-economic and political turmoil in the country. So the question is the USA heading down the similar road? The answer to this question is no, not right now at least. Why though? Why not? If injecting $9 trillion isn't going to push the country into hyperinflation, then why don't we do it all the time? Well, firstly, remember that hyperinflation is caused not only by the injection of money, but also by socio-economic and political breakdown. Unless and until multiple factors come together, it is unlikely that inflation levels will go anywhere close to 50% to be classified as hyperinflation. Secondly, as Professor Steve Henk said, governments start running larger and larger fiscal deficits. In the case of the USA, the budget deficit is roughly 50% of the revenue collected. The government collects roughly $3.4 trillion from taxes and generates $3.1 trillion through debt. This includes the spending the government had to do to control the pandemic as well. The budget deficit to GDP ratio for 2020 peaked at almost 15%, and this is the highest deficit to GDP ratio since 1945. However, even this high level of deficit to GDP is not high enough to make hyperinflation inevitable for the USA. Perhaps if the country continues to pump the same amount of money for a few more years, then hyperinflation can be considered, but at the current levels of debt, it can be safely ruled out. Apart from favorable statistics and lack of contributing factors, another reason why we can rule out hyperinflation is excess capacity in the economy. Remember that the extra $9 trillion had to be pumped because of the pandemic, and every central bank in the world did the same. Which actually puts the whole world on financial steroids, but it is not dangerous yet, because the pandemic brought the global economy to a grinding halt in 2020. As people stayed at home, the savings rate shot up. In the second quarter of 2020, savings rates for households in the USA went up from an average of 10% to almost 30%.
This caused the aggregate demand to slump. Businesses downsized and manufacturing plants reduced their capacity. In other words, the pre-pandemic level economy shrunk down. As the world began to open with vaccine rollouts, we saw aggregate demand rising again. Households showed increased demand for consumer goods because all of the pent-up savings have to be spent. What this means is that factories and businesses are now going to go back to their previous capacity. The $9 trillion in circulation will result in investments and economic activity. The unemployment that spiked in 2020 will gradually start to come down. The excess 20% that is in the market will now boost the economy. Yes, there is going to be an uptick in inflation, but this is not yet because of the excess liquidity. The uptick in inflation is because of the release of pent-up demand and supply bottlenecks. Supply chains are still not back to their pre-pandemic levels. This delay is causing demand pull inflation that will take some time to normalize. The 20% excess liquidity will, however, at some point, result in increased demand, and that will be a signal for the businesses to increase their capacity. Before that point, however, the government can use interest and tax rates to take the excess liquidity out of the system and keep the price levels in control. So the bottom line is that hyperinflation is not on the cards for the USA, unless the government pumps money at the same rate that it did in 2020 for a few more years. Secondly, hyperinflation happens at a 50% inflation rate, while it is not on the cards, higher than normal inflation is. The inflation rate may even go as high as 10% because clearly there is excess liquidity in the system, and that liquidity will push the prices up as the economy goes back to its pre-pandemic levels. Do you think too that US will dodge the bullet, or is it going into hyperinflation? Share your thoughts, comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon to receive instant updates from our channel. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.